Hello and welcome to another Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery Facebook Mystery Tour. My name's Kate Morris and I work here at the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery with Dr David Hocking. Morning, David. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge that we stand on the land of the Mooma Marina people who did not survive British colonisation. We pay our respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community and I honour Aboriginal elders past, present and value the history, culture and strength of the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. So David, you are the curator of invertebrate...
Vertebrate.
Vertebrate?
Yeah, Vertebrate Zoology and Palaeontology.
Thank you for correcting me on that because I was wondering what's the difference?
Yeah, so the vertebrate zoology is essentially all of the animals that have a backbone. So everything from fish and amphibians through to snakes, lizards, birds and mammals and us.
Okay.
So anything with a spine.
Okay.
So that's the vertebrate zoology. But then I also cover paleontology, which is fossils of all of these types of animals. So that's the remains, fossilised remains of any of the extinct animals that used to live in Tasmania and the surrounds.
Right, so that's a really interesting combination of different disciplines, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it allows us to look at both the modern fauna, the animals we have today, but also look back in time at how they evolved and how they've changed through time. The things that used to live here that help to shape the environments that we have around us today.
Oh, fascinating. Well, thank you very much for joining us today because I know that you've been on a bit of a special mission or adventure in the last few weeks.
Yeah. So we had a call a couple of weeks ago now that a whale had washed up on a beach over on the west coast. And we got some photos sent through by the members of the public that first found it. And it turns out that it was an example of a really rare type of whale, a beaked whale. And beaked whales are these really large deep sea animals that live in the open ocean and feed really deep under the water on things like squid. And I can show you a picture over here of what they look like.
Please.
So this here is a Cuvier's beaked whale. And they're pretty amazing. They hold a couple of records. They're the deepest divers. They can dive underwater, just about 3 kilometres under the water.
The deepest divers of any creature?
Of any air-breathing marine mammals. And they can also dive underwater for up to or over 3 hours at a time,
3 hours.
which is a huge amount of time to be able to hold your breath for. And then this is the skull for one of these animals here, which is a pretty tricky thing to interpret.
Probably need to explain that we're actually in the collection area, aren't we, of the Rosny facility, the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery.
No, that's true. So we're in the back of house at the moment at the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery, and we're in the marine mammal section of the zoology collection. So around us here we have a whole range of these beaked whale fossils. We also skulls. These are the modern the modern animals. Down here we have the skull of a killer whale. And there's actually quite a diverse range of these deep sea whales that live around Tasmania.
Are we in a bit of a hotspot in Tasmania?
Yeah, we are. So Tasmania is uniquely placed in that we have the warm currents that come down the east coast of Australia, and also the ones that come down the west coast and wrap around, and then the southern ocean from below. So that mixing of different oceans and different waters means that we get a really diverse assemblage of marine mammals that can wash up on our shores here.
Oh, how interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about going over to the west coast of Tasmania to look at this specimen a couple of weeks ago and what that actually involved?
Yeah, so once we got the call and we realised what type of whale it was, we knew that we had to collect a specimen in order to bring it back here to the collection. So we loaded up a vehicle and got a few people to help us. And drove over, so this was at the beach near Strawn where the pilot whale stranding happened a few years ago. So that again is one of these hotspot areas on the west coast where these animals often seem to wash up. We then had to drive onto the beach and drive down to collect some of the body of this animal in order to be able to bring back specimens for future research and to be included in the state's collection here.
Right, so how big an animal are we talking about?
Yeah, so this one was about 5 metres long.
Right.
Which
big.
is a sizable animal. And they look quite similar to a dolphin, but they're quite a lot bigger.
Yes, yeah.
And that meant that in order to get the skull for the collection, we've had to remove the head of the animal on the beach, which is a bit of a messy job.
Yes,
and then we can bring that specimen back here where we can clean it and prepare it in order to be able to house it in the collection.
Right, and you're allowed to do that because you have special permits and licenses?
Yeah, so marine mammals are protected species
Yeah.
In Tasmania and in most of the world. So you're only allowed to collect material if you're doing it under permits. And in this case, we're holding the state repository for marine mammal specimens.
Right.
So researchers from anywhere in the world can come here to look at the species that we get in Tasmania and the
Yeah.
oceans around us.
Yeah. So other people that may come across what's left of this specimen on the beach, they're not allowed to take anything away
No,
from them,
so
are they?
it was on a fairly remote part of the beach, so we had to drive quite a long way down.
Yeah.
And so the parts that we didn't collect will be essentially, they'll go back to nature.
Yep.
And they'll be eaten by the things that live on the beach.
Yes, okay.
Someone's going to get a good feed, lots of seagulls.
Behind you I can see a couple of interesting looking tools and things. Is this some of the equipment you use?
Yeah, so this is one of the we call
Ooh.
them flensing knives. So
Yes.
one of the problems with stranded marine mammals is that as the body starts to break down, they build up gases on the inside, which means there's actually a risk of the specimens exploding.
Ooh,
So having a knife on the end of a long pole means that we can poke it from afar, let the gas out before we have to do anything else.
Right.
This is one of the unusual dangers you face when working with this type of material.
indeed. So how long had this specimen been on the beach, do you think?
So by the time we got
Yeah.
there, because it took a little while to
Yeah.
organise, it was about a week
About
old.
a week.
And from when it was first found, it was quite fresh through to a week. You could see that quite a lot of decomposition had already happened. So
Right.
this stuff moves pretty quickly.
So this looks like is this a photo of the...
Yeah, so this is a photo of the animal when it was first washed up. And so the species that we went out to respond to is actually called a shepherd's beaked whale, which is one of the strangest of the beaked whales. We can see its eyes are up here,
Yes.
and its mouth's down here. And around its mouth, we have all of these little markings, and you can see them over here too. These are
Yes.
actually the sucker marks from the tentacles of a squid, which is one of the things that this animal was probably feeding on. And we wanted to confirm that that was the case. So we actually went and did a partial necropsy of the specimen, so a partial autopsy, looking at some of its organs and
Yes.
what was happening on the inside.
Yes.
And in its stomach, we found these, which are hard to see in the jar. So I printed out
Oh, thank you.
another photo. And these are the keratin beaks from squid.
Aha.
So these are the mouth parts from the squid. And because they're hard parts, they don't get digested, so they accumulate in the stomach, which means we can get an idea for how often and what species of prey that this whale was actually feeding on.
So those were all in this specimen?
Yeah,
Right.
so, and this is the type of
that's-
squid that it would have come from, so the mouth part sits up in amongst the tentacles there,
Yeah.
so that they can catch stuff with their arms and then bring it through to the beak for feeding. But in this case, they had fallen prey to a much bigger predator.
Indeed. So this animal had been feeding quite recently, you would assume, from...
Yeah,
Finding
so
this,
by
yeah.
finding food in its stomach, it was an animal that was, still swimming around and feeding before it died.
Right, so we don't quite know what happened to it.
No, in this case, because it's washed up dead on the beach, we don't really know what's happened.
Yep.
And because it had been quite decomposed by the time we got there, we weren't able to work out the cause of death.
Right, and there weren't any others around it, you know? You
No.
it was-
Beaked whales, unlike things like pilot whales, which are
Right.
often in really large groups, beaked whales live in smaller groups of sort of 6 to 12 animals. And in this case, only one animal has washed up.
Fascinating, yeah. So tell us a bit more about this shepherd's beaked whale. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And some of the specimens you've got on show for us here.
Yeah, well, I thought I would show you. So this is the skull of a strap-toothed whale, which is another of these species of beaked whale. And it's a pretty difficult object to interpret and to work out exactly what you're looking at. So I thought I would show you some more skulls that people might be more familiar with in order to help ground us in what we're looking at.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So this is the skull from a domestic dog. And you can see that it's got a mouthful of teeth with the sharp canines at the front and then the bladed carnassial and molar teeth at the back. The eyes sit about here in the front of the face, and the nose is right down at the end of the face,
Yes.
as we're all pretty familiar. So how do you turn a dog into a whale? If you imagine me putting my fingers into its nose and pulling its nostrils right up to the top of its head. That's what's happened to whales over the course of evolution. So this skull here is a bottlenose dolphin, and you can see up here is the blowhole, and that's the nostrils of the whale, of this dolphin.
Yeah, yeah.
So they have quite a long face, and you can see that it's the same bones from nasal region of a dog have been pulled right back up to the top of the head, and that puts the blowhole up on top of the head so that when they surface they can breathe. The other thing about marine mammals is because they're feeding on fish and squid, which you can generally swallow whole, you don't need sharp cutting teeth anymore. So most marine mammals like dolphins have evolved these really simple peg-like teeth that allow them to capture fish in their jaws and then swallow them whole without needing to chew on them.
Right, so the teeth are more used just for the catching as opposed to chewing.
Yeah, so one of the issues is that if you catch something underwater and you have to process it, and you're an air-breathing animal, processing takes time underwater, you're more likely to accidentally breathe in water, and it just takes longer holding your breath. So you're far better off to focus on smaller food that you can swallow in one go, and then you just don't have to worry about it. So that's sort of your classic dolphin skull. And now beaked whales have done something stranger again, and they've become really closely adapted to their aquatic environment, and they've actually taken advantage of the water around them to help them capture their food. So instead of biting their food, they open their mouth a little bit, pull their tongue back, and that creates negative pressure in the mouth that sucks in the water and any food swimming in front of them. So they catch their fish and small squid via suction. And that means that they don't need teeth along the front of the mouth, and instead they have this long tube-like snout, rostrum, front of their face, and they can open their mouth a little bit and then suck in their food. And we can see in our Tasmacetus, when we have the soft tissue of the head, this groove on the throat.
Yes.
So that's not an injury, that's a pleat in the throat that allows them to expand the floor of their mouth so they can suck more water in one go.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Now you might notice that Tasmacetus, the shepherd's beaked whale, so Tasmacetus is the scientific name for this animal,
Yep.
Still has a mouthful of teeth. And I've just spent a fair bit of time telling you that beaked whales don't have teeth. And that's one of the reasons that this animal in particular is so interesting. So this is a skull over here from another Tasmacetus that washed up, I think in 2019, another of these shepherd's beaked whales. And you can see in this bag here, it has these sort of simple dolphin-like teeth. But from the rest of the shape of the skull, it's very clearly the same type of animal as these beaked whales. So this animal is a bit of a mystery because whilst being a squid-eating beaked whale, it still has these simple peg-like teeth. And we don't really know why this species has kept its teeth, whereas most of the other ones have lost them.
So is the shepherd's beaked whale the only one that has this?
Yes, so
Right.
shepherd's beaked whale is the only one that
Unique.
can have these dolphin-like teeth erupted in the jaw when they're alive, which makes them a really unusual animal that we don't know all that much about. They've only been seen a fairly small number of times out in the ocean alive, and most of what we know comes from stranded marine animals like the one that we found on the west coast.
Right, so there's lots more to find out about.
Lots still to learn.
Yeah.
One of the ideas around why they still have teeth is that perhaps they're feeding on more fish and less squid. So most of the beaked whales are really squid specialists. And maybe because it has these teeth, maybe it feeds on fish a bit more, and that's why it didn't lose its teeth. But as we found with our specimen, it has a lot of squid in its stomach, so it's clearly still able to feed in the same way as the other beaked whales.
Yeah, yeah.
Or at least it's eating the same things. But because this is happening deep under the ocean, we don't really know how they're behaving and how they're encountering these animals.
Yeah, well, before we go, there's just a couple more things I'd like you to point out, that these specimens here and maybe what's in these jars as well.
So not all the teeth are always lost. So one of the unusual features of beaked whales is some of them will have large tusk-like teeth that stay in the jaws. And it's usually the males that have these, and these are actually used as weapons for fighting. Deer or antelopes that can fight using their horns, some of these beaked whales have these big tusks that allow them to compete.
That is big.
Yeah, they're amazing teeth.
They are amazing teeth.
This species is actually called the strap-toothed whale, and in adult males of this species, this tooth is so long that it actually wraps up around over the top of the rostrum, over the top of the nose, which means that they can't actually open their mouth more than a few centimetres. So they really are restricted to only capturing food via suction. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you was this.
Yeah, this looks very
unusual specimen right up the back here. So this is actually a fossilised partial skull from a beaked whale that was found in the Southern Ocean near Heard Island. So it's a specimen that was sitting on the seafloor where the animal had sunk to once it died, and then millennia had passed, and it actually got caught on the hook of a longline fishing hook and hauled up to the surface as bycatch. So that allows us to look at some of these animals from the deep past. So this is perhaps 2 or 3 million years old. We're still working on the dating for this.
That's very old.
And you can see that we have the long nose of the animal and then this nasal region at the back here.
Yes.
So it's just this part of the skull, and the rest of the brain case is all broken away. And it made it really difficult to identify when it was first discovered. But by comparing it with modern animals, we can see what type of bone it is. And these animals, because they're so old, are probably the ancestors of the modern beaked whales we have in the Southern Ocean today.
2 million years old, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah,
we'll let you know.
Gosh, that is a lot of information, Dave, and I know there's probably far, far more you could tell us about these animals, but you've given us a really fascinating introduction into the excitement of finding this stranded animal or this beached animal.
Yeah,
and then,
look, it's an incredibly sad thing, but then it's such a rare opportunity to get a close look at these animals that we just know so little about.
Yes, for us, and to be able to keep it in the collection for people way beyond us in the future to be able to find out even more about these animals. So very important research.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much for introducing us to this extraordinary beaked whale. And thank you, Veronica, for filming. And we'll see you again for our next mystery tour in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.